The night my mother-in-law called me a financial burden in front of 40 guests, I smiled, sipped my sparkling water, and said nothing. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was waiting for the right moment. And trust me, that moment came. Let me take you back to where this really started. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old, and for the past 6 years, I've been married to Daniel Whitmore, the youngest son of one of the most image-obsessed families in Oakville, Ontario. The Whitmore family had a beautiful house on a lakefront street, a reputation in their social circle, and an opinion about absolutely everything, especially me. When Daniel and I met, I was 24 and running a small graphic design studio out of a rented office on Lakeshore Road. It wasn't glamorous. I drove a used Honda Civic, I brought homemade sandwiches to client meetings, and I wore the same 3 blazers on rotation. Daniel fell in love with me anyway, or so I thought. His family, however, made their feelings crystal clear from the very first Sunday dinner. His mother, Margaret, looked me up and down the night we met and said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "So you do? Design?" The way she said design sounded the way someone else might say collect garbage. His father, Gordon, barely looked up from his steak. His older sister, Vanessa, spent the entire dinner talking about her own corporate law career at a firm in downtown Toronto, pausing only to ask me how much a freelance person like me could realistically earn in a year. I told her honestly. She laughed. Not a mean laugh, something worse. A pitying one. From that night forward, I was the Whitmore family project. The charity case Daniel had inexplicably dragged home. Margaret made comments about my apartment. Gordon suggested, more than once, that I look into something more stable. Vanessa sent me job postings. Actual job postings. In text messages. With notes like, "Just in case this is helpful," followed by a smiley face. And Daniel? Daniel told me not to take it personally. "That's just how they are," he'd say. "They mean well." He'd put his arm around me and change the subject, and I'd let it go. Again and again, I let it go. What none of them knew, what I hadn't told anyone outside of my business partner and my lawyer, was that my small studio had grown into something else entirely over those years. Quietly, without press releases or LinkedIn announcements, I had built a brand strategy and digital agency with clients across Canada, the US, and 3 European markets. We had offices in Toronto, Vancouver, and Calgary. We employed 62 people full-time. And the previous fiscal year, my company had cleared just under $40 million in revenue. I kept it quiet on purpose. At first, I didn't want investors or competitors paying too much attention while we were still scaling. And then I kept it quiet because I realized something uncomfortable. I wanted to see how my husband's family treated someone they genuinely believed had nothing. I wanted to know who they actually were. What I found out was worse than I expected. The Whitmore family's annual Thanksgiving dinner was always held at their lakefront property, a sprawling 6-bedroom house that Margaret referred to as the family home, with the reverence most people reserve for national monuments. Every year, 40 or so people came. Extended family, family friends, a few of Gordon's former colleagues. It was catered. There was a seating chart. Margaret wore a blazer she'd been saving since September. This particular Thanksgiving, I had a reason to actually want to be there. 3 weeks earlier, Daniel had sat me down at our kitchen table with an expression I'd never seen on him before, somewhere between rehearsed and ashamed, and told me he thought we should take a break. He said he'd been unhappy for a while. He said he needed to figure things out. He said, and I will never forget this, "I think you've always cared more about your work than about this marriage." I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I asked him one question. Had his mother put him up to this? He looked away. That was my answer. What came out over the following week, through a conversation with Vanessa that she probably thought was private but happened in the hallway of their parents' house while I was standing 8 feet away. The family had decided that Daniel should divorce me before I dragged him down any further. Gordon had apparently said, over a recent golf game, that Daniel had wasted his best years on a girl who was going nowhere. And Margaret, generous, smiley Margaret, had told Daniel that if he filed for divorce now, while I had nothing, the settlement would be clean and simple. While I had nothing. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Patricia, and she is exceptional. I explained the situation. I told her what I suspected the Whitmore family's strategy was. And then I told her something that made her go very quiet for a moment before she said, "Claire, you understand that changes everything." Yes, I understood. You see, the Whitmore family's beloved lakefront property, the house where Margaret held court every Thanksgiving, the house Gordon called paid off, and fully ours, had been quietly purchased 2 years prior by a numbered holding company as part of a neighborhood real estate consolidation. That holding company was a subsidiary of my firm's parent investment vehicle. I had not known it was their specific address when the acquisition went through. My acquisitions manager had flagged it as a desirable lakefront property in a high-value postal code. I had signed off on the portfolio, and that was that. I had, without intending to, become the Whitmore family's landlord. They had been renting their own home, the family home. The monument from a company I owned. Through a corporate lease arrangement Gordon had signed, thinking he was dealing with an anonymous property management group out of Mississauga. Patricia confirmed it. The lease was valid. They were 3 months from their annual renewal, and they had no idea. I asked Patricia to come with me to Thanksgiving dinner. She said that was unusual. I told her I'd cover her rate for the full day plus overtime. She said she'd be there. I want to be honest about something. Part of me, a significant part, considered simply letting the lawyers handle everything quietly. I could have had the lease non-renewed through the property management company, or negotiated a buyout, or simply stepped back and let the divorce proceedings handle themselves. I could have been the bigger person in a way that no one ever saw. But then I thought about the Sunday dinners, the job postings Vanessa texted me, Gordon's voice saying while she has nothing, Margaret's smile that never reached her eyes. 6 years of nodding and changing the subject and being told, in 100 small ways, that I was a burden on a family I had tried to love. I decided I wanted to be in the room. The dinner was exactly as it always was. Margaret had done the centerpieces herself, orange and white flowers, small pumpkins, candles that smelled like cloves. The caterers moved efficiently through the kitchen. Vanessa arrived in a new coat and spent the first 20 minutes showing photos of a recent trip to Portugal to anyone who would stand still. Gordon shook hands. Daniel was quieter than usual, and he didn't meet my eyes when I walked in. I had dressed carefully that morning, not to impress, to be comfortable in what was coming. I sat through appetizers. I sat through the first course. I answered questions about how I was keeping busy with the same vague smile I'd perfected over 6 years. Someone asked if I was still doing the design thing. I said yes. Someone else said that was so nice, having a creative hobby. I nodded. Margaret gave a toast. She talked about family, about legacy, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. She looked at Daniel when she said that last part. He looked at his wine glass. It was during the main course that it started. Margaret set down her fork, dabbed her mouth with her cloth napkin, and said to the table, "To all 40 people, I do think this will be the last Thanksgiving in this house for a little while. With everything in transition." She looked at me with that smile. Change can be healthy. For everyone. Several heads turned. A few people looked confused. A few, the ones who clearly knew, looked carefully at their plates. I put down my own fork. I reached into the bag I'd hung on the back of my chair. I took out a folder. "Actually, Margaret," I said, "I think this is a good moment to talk about the house." She laughed, the light, hostess laugh she used when she thought something was slightly inappropriate. "Goodness, Claire, this isn't really the time for—" "The property at this address," I said, "is currently leased under a corporate agreement signed in November 2 years ago with Lakeshore Heritage Properties Incorporated, which is a subsidiary of Redwood Asset Management, which is wholly owned by my company." I slid the folder across the table toward Gordon. "I'm your landlord. I have been for 2 years. The table went very quiet, not the polite quiet of a pause in conversation. The specific, airless quiet of a room where something has shifted, and no one is sure which way it's going to fall. Gordon opened the folder. I watched his face. I have played that expression back in my mind many times since the moment. A man who has spent 30 years being the most powerful person in every room realizes he has made a very serious miscalculation. "This isn't," he started. "The lease documents are there," I said. "Page 4 has your signature. Page 9 has the renewal terms. Your current lease expires in 47 days. Margaret had stopped smiling. Vanessa was looking at her phone, probably trying to Google something fast enough to catch up with what was happening. Daniel was staring at me, not with anger, with something I hadn't seen on his face in a long time, something that might have been the realization that he didn't know me at all. "Claire." His voice was low. "What is this?" "It's the situation," I said. "I thought you all should understand the situation clearly before the divorce proceedings move forward, since the family has been so involved in those plans. You can't just—" Vanessa started. "I haven't done anything," I said. "The lease is valid. I have no intention of acting on it today. I'm simply making sure everyone in this room has accurate information. Since accurate information seems to have been in short supply." Margaret found her voice. "You've been hiding this from us. From Daniel. For years." She said it like an accusation. Like I had done something wrong by not announcing my own finances to a family that had spent 6 years treating me like a charity case. "I didn't hide anything," I said. "No one asked. And honestly, Margaret, you'd already decided what I was worth." I was curious whether that would ever change. The caterer appeared in the doorway, read the room, and quietly retreated. "How much?" Gordon said. He meant the company. He was doing the math, trying to figure out how badly he'd miscalculated. "My last assessed valuation was just under 900 million, I said. Canadian. Vanessa put her phone face down on the table. I looked at Daniel. I had loved him once, genuinely. And looking at him in that moment at the confusion and something very close to shame on his face, I felt the last of something let go. Not with anger, with a kind of tired clarity. I think we both know this marriage has been over for longer than the last 3 weeks, I said to him. I hope you find what you're looking for. I genuinely mean that. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. Patricia, who had been sitting 3 seats down in the quiet, professional way she has of being present without being noticed, stood up at the same time. Patricia is my attorney, I said to the table. She'll be the point of contact for anything related to the property lease going forward. And for the divorce. I looked at Gordon's lawyer, a family friend named Bruce, who had been sitting near the end of the table looking like he very much wished he was somewhere else. Bruce, I'd recommend Gordon give you a call in the morning. The renewal window has specific terms. I picked up my bag. I walked through the dining room and through the front hallway, past the coat rack where my coat had been hung slightly apart from the others, as it always had been. I opened the front door. The October air was sharp and clean, and the lake was dark and flat in the distance, and I stood on the front step for a moment and breathed. Behind me, through the closed door, I could hear voices starting Margaret's sharp and high, Gordon's low and deliberate, Vanessa asking someone to look something up. The controlled collapse of a dinner party that had been designed to mark my exit from this family, and had instead become something else entirely. I walked to my car. I texted my business partner. It went fine. Talk tomorrow. I drove home along the lakeshore road with the radio off and the windows slightly cracked, and I felt, for the first time in 6 years, like I could breathe without measuring it. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Patricia was extraordinary. Because I had initiated nothing, had simply been present with accurate documentation. When the family's own plan was already in motion, the proceedings were clean. Daniel did not contest the terms. I think, in the end, he understood that there was nothing to contest. The Whitmore family renewed their lease. They negotiated through Patricia, professionally, and without drama, and the terms were fair, because I had no interest in being punitive. I had made my point. That was enough. Vanessa called me once, about 6 weeks after Thanksgiving. I let it go to voicemail. She said she had questions. I understood what she meant. She wanted to know how I'd done it, how I'd built something that large without anyone noticing. I thought about calling her back for a day or two, and then I decided that some questions are answered well enough by silence. What I think about most, when I think about that dinner, is not the moment I slid the folder across the table. It's the moment just before, when Margaret gave her toast about surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, when she looked at Daniel and meant it as a way of looking through me. I had spent 6 years making myself small in that house, dressing down, answering vague questions with vague answers, accepting the job postings and the pitying laughs and the careful exclusions. I told myself I was being patient. I told myself I was being the bigger person. But the honest truth is that I was afraid that if I took up the space I'd actually earned, something would break. Something did break, but it wasn't me. I'm back in Toronto now, in an apartment I own outright on the 23rd floor, with a view of the lake that I chose specifically because I've always loved water. My company is still growing. I hired 2 people last month that I'm genuinely excited about. I have dinner with my own family on Sundays, and it is easy and warm, and no one has ever once sent me a job posting. I don't tell this story to suggest I handled everything perfectly. I could have had more honest conversations with Daniel earlier. I could have pushed back on his family instead of swallowing it, year after year, until there was no more room to swallow. Those are real things I carry. But here's what I know. The night Margaret Whitmore called me a financial burden in front of 40 guests, I was sitting in a chair that was technically mine. I was a guest in a house that, legally, I owned, and she had absolutely no idea. I smiled. I sipped my sparkling water, and I waited. Because the thing about being underestimated, really, thoroughly, completely underestimated, is that it gives you time. Time to build, time to prepare, time to make sure that when the moment finally comes, everything is already in place. And when it came, I was ready.